How are you today, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good.
Listen, thanks for being here on such short notice. I do appreciate this. How long have you been as a singer-songwriter here in Louisville? Actually, I don't think you've been entirely here in Louisville. I think.
Well, no, I did have a little hiatus in New York, but I started writing when I was about 13 here in Louisville. So many moons ago, and yeah, like I went to New York for about a dozen years. Actually, went back and forth to New York about over the course of 20 years, probably. And ultimately decided to come back to Louisville after, I met my wife and we started a family, and we're like, hey, let's not live in a one-bedroom apartment, and let's go back to Louisville where, there's a better sense of community, and
Sure.
you don't need, you can, have space. You
Right.
can raise a child without, having to spend $30,000 on preschool.
That's right. Well, the cost of living in Louisville is easy, I think. Rolling down the River City.
Right.
So let's talk about the music scene in New York. It's dramatically different from Louisville, but I guess being an artist in that whole arena, what did you gather from that as a songwriter? Did it change the way you wrote and the way you played and the music you were producing, or?
Well, it's very stimulating, of course. There's always something going on. It really is the city that never sleeps.
Sure.
Or showers or has good aim when it pees. But it's really, I think there's always something going on, and you can always get inspired.
Sure.
That's the upside. The downside is, there were times where, to save money, I would be carrying my amp, my guitar, my electric guitar, my acoustic guitar, my little orange box, and, on the subway, and
Wow.
just so I wouldn't have to spring for a cab. And, you got to, nobody can rehearse in their basement like here in Louisville. You've got to go to a rehearsal space and rent. So it's just more expensive on every level.
Right.
So was there a place or a group or an area that you would go if you needed to feel inspired, that you definitely know that you could draw some energy from it? Was that ever?
It's really odd. In Louisville, I feel like there are spaces like that where I would like to go and, really. Maybe it's, in the wonderful park system here in Louisville.
Sure.
But in New York, it was actually the opposite. It was like, in order to get inspired, I needed to get away.
Right.
I would go home.
Right.
I would, and I had towards the end, I had an apartment in Washington Heights. And it was, it was off the beaten path. But I had a big space to myself. And, that's what I needed more than anything.
Yeah. I feel like, New York is fast. Everything's fast, and it could be easily to miss something, that you could get inspired by. So, and I think that, that's really awesome that, you are living in New York like that, because that's just different realms of thinking, man. Different places, different, views and things like that. So, how did you, evolve as a musician, in New York? And then coming back to Louisville, and then how did that help you just be who you are today? You know what I'm saying?
Well, New York and I think also LA, there's an extent to which it's a city of hustlers, and so, when you want to get in the rat race, it's a great place to be, and that it helped me in that respect. Where I was able to, get signed to a label, start touring out of New York. I was able to start doing some film and television work and stuff like that. And the drawback, especially from a touring perspective, is that you're still paying New York rent, even though you're getting paid the same as, a touring musician who lives in Louisville, Kentucky. So, but there's always people to, occasionally right now I'm like, I just don't, everybody knows everybody. It's 6 degrees of separation in New York. Sooner or later, you'll find the right person. And I feel like Louisville requires a little bit more work on your part. That's,
Well, having been to the Big Apple, and folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Louisville Arts Live. We actually have live in the studio Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade, talking about his experience in New York City. We do the show every Saturday at 3 o'clock, and my co-host today is Mr. Jacob Langley. But talking about the dynamics of New York, fast-paced, and then Louisville's art scene, I think, is a lot more relaxed and a lot less stressful in a lot of ways. But in comparing the two, the dynamics of the creative communities in both, what was an influence for you in your writing? I guess in your performance, were you in any way, shape, or form? Did you get the feeling that you had to mirror certain things, or were you blazing your own trails with your performances? Or
I didn't really. I was most influenced by the musicians that I was working with. I played with like 3 or 4 musicians almost exclusively for about 4 or 5 years. In the Navigators, and you create sort of this means of communicating it completely your own. And of course, everybody, your friends, you're going out to shows, and I felt a real sense of community, which is great. In that, people would be very supportive. They would come, and you could always, everybody would be at everybody else's shows, and that was great. But at the same time, there was this sense of, well, we're not, we're a community, but at the same time, you're doing your thing, I'm doing my thing, and
right.
It's not like, oh, there's a New York sound, And I think in a smaller place, you can get pockets of sounds. I still feel like even in Louisville, there's a diverse enough sound that, if one artist, say, breaks out, maybe everyone would be like, oh, well, that's the Louisville sound. But I don't even think a town this size has a sound.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we have Mr. Dewey in the studio live. This is Louisville Arts Live. We do it every Saturday at 3 o'clock. So growing up, who were your musical inspirations? Writers or performers?
Well, I loved, my first serious songwriter was Paul Simon. And mainly listened to Simon and Garfunkel. And it's interesting, I was thinking about this. You always hear about, I later got into Dylan very big.
Sure.
And you've heard a lot of the next Dylan, the next this. And, and there have been different people who've done that. There really hasn't been something like Simon and Garfunkel, for example. And you could say that about a lot. I mean, there's never been a band necessarily like The Who, although a lot of people be like, oh, this band has a lot of high energy, and you sort of know what the template is. But I don't think even people are trying to be, that melodic,
right.
Beautiful harmony. And although I should say my old Lone Bellow, they're 3 voices,
right.
But those harmonies are great. And my old Brian Griffin, the drummer I used to play with, he's not singing. He sings with them occasionally, but for the most part he just plays drums. But that is, I'm sort of beginning. I feel like there's more of a melodic resurgence, which is cool. I'm excited about that.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that with Simon and Garfunkel, they had a tone of a spirituality too. There was the writing, and then the harmony of the voices, and then just the message. I think ultimately was
right.
What made Simon and Garfunkel successful for me.
Well, and what's really interesting is that I grew up trying to play those songs, and now I look back and I'm like, well, if you look at them as songs,
right.
There's a reason some of them aren't covered as much. They're not as sophisticated as later Paul Simon material.
Right.
It really comes down to, just when you get 2 voices that sound that good together, you can sing the phone book and it'll work. And I'm not saying the songs were bad. I'm saying they just weren't, an example of Paul Simon's best songwriting.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we have Andrew Dewey Kincade live in the studio. He's getting ready to perform. He's our performing artist of the week. This is Louisville Arts Live. We do it every Saturday. My co-host today is Mr. Jacob Langley with Pandarella Productions.
Yep.
Working on my vocabulary here, expanding some words, I guess. Dewey, if you don't mind, I apologize. If you don't mind, without further delay, you want to do a song for us?
Sure.
All right.
This is a song I did that was on the soundtrack to the movie Dream Riders. And this was even before I got the gig to do the film. They just showed me a clip, and I wrote the song, recorded it that same day, sent it back to them, and they were like, oh, wow. That song has to be in the movie. So at any rate, it's called A Few Less Miles to Go. Let's take a trip across the great divide that separates us from standing side by side. The road is long, getting longer while we wait. Let's hit that highway before it gets too late. Hey, a million miles away, but I feel like I could go a million miles today. Whoa, it's a long and lonesome road, but at least I got a few less miles to go. Got separated somewhere inside the haze, and I'm trying to find you out on this lost highway. Well, who lost who is a bleak and pointless game. Won't change the outcome if you find someone to blame. Hey, a million miles away, but I feel like I could go a million miles today. Whoa, it's a long and lonesome road, but at least I got a few less miles to go. Days upon us, and I know I'm getting close. Maybe today's the day, but I know too much to coast. Gotta climb that mountain, gotta reach the other side, gotta make it somehow across the great divide. Hey, you're a million miles away, but I feel like I could go a million miles today. Whoa, it's a long and lonesome road, but at least I got a few less miles to go.
And that is Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade live in the studio with Louisville Arts Live. What was the name of that song, Dewey?
A few less miles to go.
Sir, I tell you what, you've got an amazing voice, and I don't know how you are able to do that and then the harmonic at the same time. I think it's amazing. I can't walk and chew gum at the same time.
Awesome, man. It really was awesome, for real. I really enjoyed that, because I was over here writing down the way it was making me feel. I always do that when I hear somebody, like a new artist or somebody new and they're playing live. I always sit down and I always write down how that song makes me feel. At the time I wrote down, it was like dreams, passion, but it was like lonely at the same time, but it was a sense of like triumph and, hope at the same time. It was a good feeling. I like that a lot. So.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we have Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade live in the studio. He's been performing for us. He's going to continue to perform for us. We're going to keep him trapped here for the next 30-something minutes. And Dewey, I want to thank you for being here in the studio. So, what's your motivation when you're writing a song? Are you tapping into just experiences that you've had? Are you painting a story, or what's your motivation when writing?
Well, I think starting when I was 13 until maybe about 5 years ago, I just wanted to always be a songwriter. That's what I was. And so in many respects, writing a song, my motivation was to prove that I was a songwriter. And after you accumulate a certain number of songs, and I was like, well, I've done this. I've written this song. I've written that song. It's like, I didn't feel like I had to write a song anymore. And in some respects, that was a very liberating feeling, because when a song presented itself, I hear people, I think Beck was like, once said, oh, I write songs, every day, songs about writing, brushing my teeth. And to me, it's like, well, I want every song to matter.
Sure.
And, I feel like I may be a little rusty at times, if it's been a month or so before I've sat down to try and write a song. But, I feel like the motivation's always true. It's always something that has to be said. It's never something I'm like, oh, well, I'm just sort of tinkering and I don't have to write this song. I always feel like I do have to write the song. So
do you wait for the prompting for you to sit down and write, or are you sitting down and you're just, when you're ready to write, you're cranking it out?
I was just thinking about Louis C.K. has this routine where he's talking about how much he likes to sit, right?
Sure.
And he's like, before I get up, I need to get all the information in advance, and that's kind of how I feel about songwriting. In that, I can feel or hear a song, like there's a chorus in my head, and I'll carry it around with me. And sometimes I'll carry it around with me, weeks.
Sure.
And then, la da da, and then I'll keep that melody. Well, suddenly I'll put words to the melody, like, oh yeah, da da, and suddenly it has words. And next thing I know, there's a point where I'm like, I gotta sit down. Like, this song's gotta be, I might forget this. I know it's like months. In one case, it was years before the song entered my head and I actually sat down to write it. But I've always been a firm believer that you never force the song.
Right.
It comes when it comes. It tells you when it's ready to be born.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
It's a good way to put that, for real.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we have Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade in the studio. He's talking about the process that he goes through when he's writing, and he's just waiting for the song to hit him, right?
Right. It's a little amazing sometimes. There was a song I wrote. I used to walk through the World Trade Center when I was in New York, and I would just go through the basement again and again and again. And I had a friend who lived down there, and this was late at night. It was always empty. This big, empty, deserted, huge building, and it just amazed me that you could walk through this building in the middle of the night and no one would be there, and and I would always get songs in my head at that point. And my theory was if the song lasted till I got home, then it was probably going to be a good song. But I was never one of those people who was like, oh my God, I had the best idea for a song and I forgot it.
Right.
And I'm like, no, it couldn't have been a good song. You didn't even remember it. I mean, don't worry.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself writing down on like cocktail napkins, little lines to songs, or making memos to yourself, things of that sort?
Again, there's times where I feel like I should.
Sure.
I'm like, I should really just, I should write that down. There was a time when I did, and now I'm like, you know what? The best ideas happen when you're getting in the groove and you're in the writing groove.
Sure.
Like a chorus, something where you just get this refrain again and again in your head. Like, one of my songs, "Here Comes the Hurricane." That chorus was in my head. Here comes the hurricane. Here comes the. There's nothing fancy about that statement.
Right.
And then you sit down, and then all the clever lines, I guess, are when I sat down to write the song. It's not that the impetus that made me want to write the song in the first place.
Well, folks, if you're just tuning in, we have Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade live in the studio. This is Louisville Arts Live. We do it every Saturday at 3 o'clock. My name is Sean Gabriel. My co-host today is Mr. Jacob Langley with Pandorella Productions. And we have been talking about Pandorella. We've been listening to some great music. Dewey, you want to do another song for us?
Sure.
All right.
This one's called Invisible Man. Was a beggar at the age of 13. Unwanted, unneeded, unholy, and unclean. I was taken and tortured, but I didn't give in. But my eyes were open wide to the world we live in. Well, I learned pretty quickly I wasn't needed around. So I hid in the shadows where I'd never be found. In the alleys, in the valleys, in the fog and in the dust. I spoke to no one, there was no one to trust. Well, I watched as you squandered and wasted your share. How you took what you got, but you didn't even care. How you murdered and stole and more terrible stuff. How you cheated and gambled and stranded in love. Well, I would steal what I needed, but I wouldn't leave a trace. But I never stole nothing that could not be replaced. And I never complained about the hand I was dealt. And I never hurt no one, 'cause I knew how it felt. Oh, the living, it was easy, and I quickly got bored. I had what I needed, but I wanted much more. Played tricks on the wicked, the scurrilous too. I helped out when it counted for the ones who were true. I might have spent my life hidden, but that wasn't the plan. And I crossed a very twisted and powerful man. He sent trackers and tracers just to pick up my trail. I was beaten and battered and thrown into jail. The judge asked from his bench if I had any words. So I told of the things I'd seen, I'd heard. But the judge interrupted, 'cause he didn't have time. And I just needed to tell him if I'd committed the crime. Well, I could have lied, but I didn't see the point. So the judge gave me 20 upstate in the joint. Well, I went to prison, and man, it was hell. It was a lot like I'd seen watching everybody. All hail, I'm the invisible man. You see what you want, but I see what I can. And I don't think that I could ever be like you. One day you'll all be invisible too.
Great job. We have live in the studio, this is Little Parts Live. We do this every Saturday at 3 o'clock. We have the one and only and Mr. Andrew Dewey Kincade, who is performing well in the studio. Sir, that was a great, great song.
Thank you.
Very impressed. We were talking about Bob Dylan earlier, and to me, that I could see a little bit of an influence with that song, if I'm right. So I thought that was a great song. It was well written. And so you were talking about the Twin Towers. Was any of that song motivated by that experience, or?
Well, sometimes, like I said, I feel like instead of being a songwriter, I'm a song diviner.
Sure.
So like somewhere these songs come from, and my job is to just sort of write them down. And so it's funny because ever since I wrote that, I've sort of thought about, the song doesn't really follow the story of like Guantanamo Bay, but I thought about the story of like, a kid who just sort of gets caught in the wrong place in the wrong time, really wrong place, really wrong time.
Sure.
And, they're to the rest of the world, this person's invisible because they don't see that, how a good person could be in that situation.
Yeah.
And they're sort of convicted without a trial in that sense.
Yeah, it was like, because I was like getting like a Robin Hood sense of like this guy's like, he's triumphing, he's, taking not, necessarily from the rich and giving to the poor, but in a sense, just of justice, of, a real world justice, of a street justice, I guess you could say, So I thought that was really cool. It was like the hustle of, like you said, the kid,
Yeah.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is Dewey Kincade in the studio live with Louisville Arts Live. He's just performed a couple live songs for us, and I'm telling you, if you haven't heard of Dewey yet, you are in for a treat. So, sir, you brought a couple tracks for us. Did you want to maybe play a track or two?
That'd be great.